So again, thank you all for being here. What I will start with is just a run through of our schedule for those watching, for the public. Again, this is our busy season where we go through the mayor's proposed 2025 budget and meet with departments and bring a level of transparency to our city. We all question the departments on any changes that we see or any initiatives that we see, and ultimately it leads in a voting process by the Common Council. Thank you. And for the record, we are also joined by committee member Sergio Adams. So the schedule that we have, so today we are meeting, we're going through general overview of the budget. We're going through our debt report provided by our treasurer, our budget office, and our administrative service office's presentation, and just some general Q&A. Next week, we will be meeting on Tuesday, October 8th, and we will hear from the fire department as well as the Albany Police Department. Thursday, October 10th, we will be meeting with Recreation, Youth and Workforce, and the CPRB. The following week, on Tuesday, October 15th, we'll be meeting with the Law Department and our Department of Neighborhood and Community Services, encompassing community services, planning, and buildings and regulatory compliance. The week of the 21st, we will have our first public hearing. That's a time where the public can come and speak on anything particular to the budget, any comments you have. That will take place right at the top of our meeting at 7 o'clock. And then on Wednesday, October 23rd, we will be meeting with the Albany Water Department, Department of General Services, and Engineering. Going into the last week of October, Tuesday, October 29th, we will have a general budget discussion and discussion on bond ordinances and recommendations of any proposed council changes. We will also have another meeting following our caucus on Wednesday, October 30th for the same purpose, again, deliberation by the committee. And then the intent is to vote on the budget come Monday, November 4th. However, subject to change depending on how much deliberation and conversation we have, that could go into later November if we need to. If we do change, we will do appropriate notices and update our schedule online. Okay, so with that being said, are we starting with our treasurer? Great. So we will start with our debt report presentation by our treasurer. Oh, okay.
There we go. My apologies. I did not get the memo that I need the debt that you wanted the debt report for this meeting, so I don't have one prepared yet. It's not markedly different from the one we issued last year, at least for this year. But we will get that to you, and I'll come back and go through that at a later time. So,
okay.
You know, perhaps, hopefully we'll have the third quarter, thank you. Hopefully we'll have the third quarter finance report then, and maybe I can come in and do it all in one fell swoop. So, I was here to talk about my budget, which I assume that's what...
Perfect.
Okay.
We can go through, we can go through items from you for the budget, and then we'll save that for a later presentation, and we'll add it to the agenda.
Great, thank you. So for those watching at home, my name is Darius Shanfar. I am the Treasurer and the Chief Financial Officer of the City of Albany. Under my purview is accounts payable, accounts receivable, city borrowing, the debt. I'm also the tax collector and also the parking violations, parking ticket collector, for lack of a better term. Just so everyone is aware, I don't think I've sent out an email on this, but I am actually acting as Director of Parking Violations right now. Our longtime director has retired, so that has taken a good chunk of my time this last month, but it's going quite well. Overall, my budget is not too different year to year. It's a little bit different from last year, and it really is different on the salary side, and that's mostly caused by staffing up for what we anticipate will be an increased workload in my office and parking violations as the speeding camera tickets come into play. They are expected to go online on October 7th, when violations will no longer be given warnings, they will be given actual tickets. The process that it takes to get through to actually issuing the ticket takes less than 2 weeks, and so we expect to start getting a lot of phone calls after Columbus Day. Other than that, the only other thing in my budget I think that's a little bit noteworthy is increased postage, just because we are under state law, we were required to send out receipts for people's property taxes. We had only done that previously upon request, and people would send in their tax payments and basically send a request that we send their receipt back. So starting a couple years ago, we are doing the receipts in one fell swoop, and just waiting till March or April once most of the payments have come in. And we mail out the receipts to people both who paid through their escrow, which we didn't really do before, and everybody in general. It's also an opportunity to explain a little bit of budget finance for the city. People seem to have liked the fact that they get the receipt and a little information about what's going on at the city. Other than that, I don't know if anybody has any questions.
To check here, Gideon, do you go through the major changes? Because this is in the treasurer's revenues, the capital city funding changes, et cetera. Is that part of your presentation? Because we don't need to jump into that now if you're going to have this covered. Okay, thank you. Any questions for our treasurer? Okay.
Thank you.
We look forward to receiving the future reports for Q3 and the debt report, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So let's go into the overall budget presentation next by our budget director, Gideon Grande. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Gideon Grande, Budget Director for the city. And it's a pleasure to be here and present the Mayor's 25 proposed budget. I guess I'll get right into it. On slide 2 of the presentation, you'll see a couple tables just summarizing the all funds budget summary. As you can see, the general fund has experienced about a $5 million decrease over the prior year. That's primarily due to pulling the Albany for All expenditures downward in 2025, as we have gotten, the majority of that money out the door as of last month, and what will happen through the end of the year, as well as our internal capital projects where some of that money was allocated. Water, a bit of an increase. That's mostly on debt service for both the city side and also for debt service the county is incurring, that then trickles down to the water department in the form of the sewer charge. Youth and workforce, that fund is entirely state and federal funded and provides both youth and workforce training programs to residents of the city. Capital projects, I know this has been a bit of a discussion in last year especially, but we are down about $14 million in our capital fund for 2025, with the debt-funded portion of that down about $20 million. Authorized positions, we are going up. In the general fund, about 26 positions. Those are primarily in 4 areas. Recreation, as we'll be taking over the operations of the Palmieri Sports Complex. The CPRB becoming a city department. Engineering, staffing up. Some of their additional positions are transfers from DGS, just taking over those functions. And police, as the mayor mentioned in her presentation, to get a few more non-sworn personnel there to try to alleviate some of the administrative burden on officers. So year over year, all funds were up about 30 positions, budget to budget. Just want to start with a little bit of review of Just wanted to start with a little bit of a review of where the city is economically. I think overall everyone sort of has seen that economic growth is pretty strong. National GDP targets don't always correlate here to Albany because we are pretty insulated by the state government being the majority of our economy. But inflation is down into the mid-3 range, and in recent months has really started to take a downward trend. The Federal Reserve has noticed that and is starting to ease off interest rates. Employment has continued to rise. We're back up to that $45,000 employment level that we saw pre-recession. Unemployment remains around 4%. It's been ticking up recently. That's really due to as the baby boomer generation retires, our labor force is starting to shrink. We have about 2,000 people in the city unemployed, and that number hasn't really changed. It's just our labor force has shrunk, so that 2,000 becomes a higher percentage of the total. Next slide. Some good news to report on the labor market. Household income is up in 2023 is up $10,000 from the prior year to $61,000 in 2023. So after a downward movement during COVID, we're really starting to see that recovery take hold. And again, as sort of I mentioned on the unemployment slide, employment of about 45,000 residents that we had prior to COVID has become the new normal. Taking a look at regional housing, I know housing's a big topic for everyone, and while this isn't city specific, just taking a look at the overall trend in the region, you can see that during and subsequent to COVID, growth rates were pretty substantial, but we've leveled off and seem to have gotten to a new place here with housing costs. And the slowing down and the rising of the cost is both a good thing and a bad thing. On one hand, people like to see their home price or their home value go up. On the other, obviously, it's more unaffordable as prices rise. So, a sort of both good and bad indicator here that we've seen a leveling off of housing costs. Getting into the actual budget here, this is the city's general fund budget for 2025. As I mentioned, a $5 million decrease from last year. You'll see state aid is up. Aid and incentives to municipalities from the state was increased last year by $50 million statewide. That was about 1.5 million to the city. That revenue is anticipated to continue. The aforementioned capital city funding up $5 million. And we're sort of viewing the capital city funding and the 19A pilot for Empire State Plaza as sort of a single combined concept that we'll have 35 million in combined revenues there for sort of the state's $6.5 billion of property that they have in the city. It obviously increases our tax rate when we have to take that much off the rolls. There, federal aid down about 23 million. That's where the ARPA revenues are coming out of the budget as we move forward, and we will not have those available into the future. Again, both inflation and real economic growth are driving that sales and use tax number. We're expected to come in, I have it a little later in the slide, about 48.4, 48.5 million for 24, so we have a 3.25% growth factored in for 2025. As the mayor outlined in her presentation, a 2% property tax increase, and then all the other revenues, with the exception of the departmental income where the speed camera revenue is located, are pretty flat. When you look at the pie chart, we do have a fairly diverse revenue base. Obviously, sales and use tax and property tax are two major local sources, comprise about half the revenues, and then the various state aid and departmental income, the other half. Just going back at a historical look at the property tax levy. So over the past 10 years, property tax increases have averaged 1% annually, which is well within the state tax cap level. On the next slide, you can see the breakdown of the tax levy between the homestead and non-homestead classes. So I think while any one taxpayer may have an increase or a decrease, I think it's important to note that we are not increasing the level of taxation on the residents in this budget. And down below, we had the reval, and a lot of people's assessments changed pretty dramatically. So, I have that middle bar highlighted of about 60% on the homestead side and about 40% on the non-homestead side. So that was the average increase in the level of taxable assessments. So if you were right on the average, your tax change will be the exact change in the levy. If you vary around that median number, you can see the differences in the change in your taxes. Normally when I'm here, I have a little bit easier time pinpointing an exact number for everyone, but with the reval, everyone's property increased or decreased by somewhat varying amounts. And here's just another summary of, the particular examples that the mayor showed in her presentation on Tuesday. These are actual homes, and you'll see those two homes on the bottom there, that those two homes both were either about 8 or 9 points above the median on the left or 8 or 9 points below the median on the right. And as a result, you have a 5% tax increase and a 5% tax decrease. I think that really shows the concept pretty well of what's going on. Obviously, the rate, as we captured more value on the roll, has decreased by about 38%. And this slide, I just like to remind everybody each year about when you look at your property tax bill in its totality. Very few people, I think, do, just because the municipal and the school bills come at different times of year. But the city is really only about a quarter of your tax bill, and the remaining pieces make up the other 3/4. Again, sales and use tax, I sort of alluded to this on the revenue slide. We're seeing very good growth so far in 2024, and we've backed off that level here for the 2025 budget. 23 actuals were a little disappointing. We were doing very well up until actually the fourth quarter reconciliation, when we had a bit of a jurisdictional adjustment in December. So Tax and Finance actually estimates the first 2 months in each quarter and sends them to each county, and then it's finally trued up in the last month. So we had a quote-unquote bad December, but it really wasn't in the base number. It was in the adjustment, and we don't anticipate that to continue. On the next slide, we see our 3 major state aid buckets, so to speak: the Capital City funding, the 19A Empire State Plaza pilot, and then the aid and incentives to municipalities, which is given to every city, town, village in the state. We have assumed a $5 million increase in that $30 million that we get for Capital City and 19A in 2025. On the expenditure side, again, down about $5 million. You'll see wages are up about a little over 3% as we have collective bargaining agreements and such. Pension, obviously wages are going up, and pension rates are going to be increasing for the next state fiscal year. Payroll taxes up in line with those wage increases. Health insurance, both on the active side and the retiree side, you'll see the actives are going up slightly, retirees down. So the city used to have sort of a ladder or umbrella of pharmacy contracts with multiple vendors. This past year, we RFP'd that pharmacy benefit business, and we're able to get a single vendor to come in and take all of it. And as a result, we're dropping our costs by about $3.5 million. Most of that accrues to the retirees, as you can see on here, as they use far more pharmacy benefit than the actives. But overall, a good story that we're going to see healthcare go down about $2 million from last year's budget. Personal service, sort of as I mentioned, the wages up 3.3 on labor contracts and other cost of living adjustments, and benefits flat with pension rising and healthcare down. On the non-personal service side, I think we're holding the line pretty well. The city operating expenses, that sort of blue bar at the bottom there, only going up 1.7%. Those are your utilities, rents, contractual services, and I think that we should be able to hold to that number and keep providing good value for the taxpayer. The green bar, which is debt service, we've talked about it a bit, that with these new projects coming online, we're going to see an increase in debt service from the low we saw in 2024. On the next slide, just a quick overview of the 2025 capital plan with each department and its funding sources. $44 million of debt is what we will be requesting authorization for. That is a decrease of $20 million as compared to the 2024 plan. And we're getting $20 million in state and federal aid from various sources here, mostly in engineering for the various state roadway aid programs, whether that's CHIPS, state touring routes, et cetera. In recreation, we're bringing in the New York Swims money and also funding for the Washington Park Playground. Neighborhood services, that's the first tranche that we've been awarded by the federal government of $3 million for the demolition of the Lincoln Towers housing complex. We have another $3 million programmed for 2026 that is sort of in the member appropriations process at the federal level currently. Sort of the 4 big projects we have in the capital plan that I think everyone is pretty noticeable. The Lincoln Park Pool, we're looking at about a $30 million total project cost on that with $11 million in outside funds. So a pretty significant contribution from the state and other individuals. Hoffman, the renovations there are going to be approximately $10 million with $2.4 million in state and federal aid funding that. And Albany West, the new community center, we have a total project cost now in this budget of $20.5 million with $2 million coming from federal sources. Good story on the City Hall rehabilitation. This project, you can see the guys walking around all the time. This project actually came in about $2-3 million under our estimates. So we're going to be looking at about a $10 million city share there instead of the original maybe 14 or 15 that we'd anticipated. This next slide sort of gets into, I think, looking at city debt and just some general concepts here is this chart on the top left is basically a timeline view of how the capital process works. That in any given year at the beginning of the year or in the first year, the legislature you'll appropriate $1 million and authorize that $1 million of debt. Then the next column is how that project might expend money. $100,000 for design in the first year, major construction occurring in the second, and then closeout and retainage being released in the third. And then you'll see in the next column how we might issue the debt to fund that project. So in the first year, Treasury and Budget will decide most likely that we can cash flow a $100,000 design expense and not issue any debt. And then as the project moves along, we'll match the debt issue with the cash. And then the fourth column is how the debt service comes online, with those issues. I think the major point here is that for a project that you appropriate in 2025, you're probably not going to see the real impact on the debt service side until 2030. So it's a very delayed impact that happens. And I know there's been some questions about the size of our plans recently with the budgeted debt. And you can see that in 23, 24, and 25, in 23, the budget authorized $44.5 million of debt, and we issued zero. Both budget and treasury work very close together to manage the cash flow and to ensure that we're not borrowing money that we don't need. In 24, sort of the same story, where the budget called for $62 million of debt, and we issued $33.5 million of new money. 2025, $44 million, and we're anticipating a new debt issue of about $35 million in 2025. So regardless of when it's authorized, we are behind the scenes matching expenditures and revenues and keeping the cash where it needs to be. On the right here, you'll see the anticipated debt service in the 5-year window here that, yes, we are going to see some debt and service increases from this plan, looking at 16.6 in 2025, rising about $2 million in 2026, and then up to about $22 million in 2027. I will say these figures are below the locally imposed 10% of operating expenditures debt limit. And finally, just an update on where we are with the ARPA local fiscal recovery funds. When I sat here a year ago, and the mayor alluded to it as well on Tuesday, we anticipate getting all these funds out the door by the end of 2024. Obviously, federal election uncertainty and potential clawbacks wants to make sure that, we have most of this money allocated and to avoid any clawbacks from the feds. So this is where we spent the money thus far, and we have about $11 million to finish the Albany for All program expenditures at this point.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Gideon. With that, a lot of information that we went through, I'm going to open it up to the committee for initial questions. Councilmember Keegan. Oh, and sorry, before we do, actually, I just want to notice a few people. So we are also joined by our new legislative aide, Alyssa Camara, our city clerk, Shaniqua Clerk, that's what I wrote. Shaniqua Jackson, Shaniqua Clerk, and our Councilmember Romero as well. Councilmember Keegan.
Good evening, Gideon, and thank you so much for spending all of these evenings during budget with us. I truly appreciate your patience with us, and I do have a number of revenue questions, and I apologize. I'm just going to go kind of line by line. So starting on page 11, line 1116, we're anticipating an increase in about $375,000 in cannabis revenue. Do we know kind of where we landed on that?
So the last quarter that we received, which would have been Q2 of '24, we got $100,000. That's been quite a remarkable increase over just 2 years. I think our first quarter that we got for 2023 was like $8,000, and it's grown to $100,000 already in the last quarter we received from the county. So, I think continued growth there, and that's why $500,000 is in, because I think 125 per quarter is a fairly reasonable estimate.
Okay. And I think you answered my question on the nearly $1 million increase in sales tax revenue. That's based upon the intended growth of 3% roughly next year. Okay. And then I also noticed there's a pretty significant increase in our expected utilities gross. Can you just explain how we got, I think it's like 600,000?
Yeah, I think that the '24 budget was just a little low. You can see that in '23 actual was $2.3 million. I think with, continued increases in energy prices, I think that's a very achievable figure.
Okay. And then I'm going to skip down to line 1289.03. The DGS fees are expected to increase by several $100,000. Do we know, is there something new that's going to?
No, I think just not necessarily new, but I think increased enforcement by DGS on, sort of the property upkeep fees and fines. I mean, that's what's mostly in that line. I think we've actually collected $800,000 thus far this year.
Okay.
So they're just doing a better job, or depending on how you want to use the word better, but just continuing to enforce our city ordinances that you passed regarding property maintenance.
And the same thing with the sale of methane gas. Was there a rate change or a new source that resulted in the increase for that?
No, so again, so far this year they have turned on a second turbine, so that's really where that's coming from. We're doing about $40,000 in revenue per month, so times 12.
Okay. And then if we go down to the public safety section, lines 1560.04 and 1565, the code violations court increases and the rental registry increases, is that also based upon the actuals from 2024?
Yeah, the rental registry seemed to be what's pacing. Excuse me. Seems to be what it's pacing at. The codes, I know, this revenue is in codes, but it's really mostly generated by corporate counsel, and they've received a lot more court time. I think they're up to 2 full days a week, so they're just processing these cases much, much faster than they ever were in the past.
Okay. And then on page 12, I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure I'm correct. Under culture, line 2025.01, field facility use, is that related to the fees that we're expecting or anticipating from Mary?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And then I also noticed that there was a pretty significant increase for the landfill usage charges. Do we know what that is in relation to? Because I had thought we were moving away from,
Yeah, again, that's really based on the 23 actual when we collected 2.3 million. I, again, think that the 24 budget was just a little bit conservative on that front.
okay. And then on page 13, under use of money, 2401, we downgraded by about 800,000, the interest and earnings. Do we know where that came from?
So obviously the Fed's cut interest rates, minimally last month, and I think we anticipate interest rates continue to be cut. Also, Darius had the ability to invest a lot of the ARPA local fiscal recovery fund cash that has now been put out to projects. So with our cash balance being a little bit less and rates going down, you'll see that number cut in half from our 2023 actuals.
Okay. And then going all the way down under permits, again, I'm assuming the increase for the stabilization and demolition fees is related to what we actually took in this year?
Yeah, I mean, that number is really just a pass-through. Whatever we budget on the expense side, we budget on the revenue side. So I think that, 1.6 seems to be about what we're coming in at this year. Again, from a budgetary perspective, it doesn't really matter what we budget there as long as the expense and revenue match, because codes goes out and does the work and then sends the bill for the work to the property owner. So it's really a net zero to us.
Okay. And then if we go to page 14, and I think this is the one that stuck out to me the most, 2610.02 for traffic violations and police court fees, we increased those by 6 million.
Yes. Those are the speed camera school zone revenues that are anticipated for a full year of 2025. As Darius mentioned, the school zone speed cameras, they've been turned on for warnings, I think about a month ago, and the first ones are going to be coming online for violations next week, and more zones are going to be added, and they should all be operational by the end of calendar 2024.
Do we know where we came up with the $6 million number? I mean, do we even have the capacity to process $6 million in tickets?
Well, I mean, it's fairly automated. The vendor is going to be, doing a lot of that work, and these notices are sent out fairly automatically. Yes, we have staff in police, we have staff in treasurer's office to both approve the ticket and then deal with the adjudication on the back end. But yes, I think that this number is quite achievable, and when you think about it in magnitude, 6 million is about what we collect in parking revenue every year from tickets. So it's not, I just don't think it's unreasonable to assume that we'll see a similar magnitude from these cameras. A lot of our schools are placed on very high volume roads. That's a little bit unusual compared to other municipalities. Like, our schools are on Central, on Washington, on Hackett, on Western, with very, very high traffic counts. A lot of other municipalities have their schools tucked away in neighborhoods. That's just not where they are for us. So I think, this revenue will be maybe larger than you've seen in other municipalities.
Okay. And on that same page, I just had a quick question for the insurance recoveries. Is there a reason why that number went up? Do we know what that's in relation to? That's line 2680.
I'll have to take a look at that one and get back to you. But,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm assuming it's.
Yeah.
It was there for a
I'm
reason.
sure there's a reason.
And then I think this is the last, or no, I have a couple more. Okay, sorry. Page 15. Line 277301, it looks like our reimbursement for civil service went up. Can you just?
Yeah, that's the school district's reimbursement of our
Okay.
HR department for processing their civil service. As you can see, it's similar to the 2023 amount.
Okay. And 2779, the reimbursement for legal services went up by, I think we made the increase was 5 times what we had for last year? Do we know? But it's still far below 2023, so I don't,
Yeah, you know, that's a number that bounces around a bit, and depending on how many cases Corporation Counsel wins or loses and whether attorneys' fees were awarded. But sort of looking at over a 5 or 6 year period, 50,000 seems to be about the average, you know. As you see, 2023 was 75. We got some years in there at 20, 30,000, but overall that seems to be a good number.
and then for the reimbursement for the homes and community renewal, I'm assuming that that went down as a result of federal changes to federal funding? That it went from 2.7 million to 2.4 million?
Yeah, I just don't think we're going to have as much reimbursable activities within the Neighborhood Services Department as we did previously.
Okay. And then the change on the interfund transfers, it was about 800,000.
Yeah, so we issued a note in 2024 which had a premium on it. So the premium sits over in the debt reserve fund and will be applied to the general fund when we make the interest payment in 2025.
Okay. And now I'm down to I think my last 3 questions. Sorry. Line 3001 on page 16. I'm assuming that this is related to the increase in AIM that was budgeted in to the state budget this year.
Correct. That was the $50 million statewide increase that we received, about $1.4 million.
And I know federally we've reached the 100,000 threshold. Are we now included in the AIM calculations for a city of that size, or has the state not made that adjustment yet?
Well, they didn't make that adjustment for their 24-25 state budget, but included in that legislation with the $50 million add was provision for the executive branch to study AIM and maybe review the formula on how it should be done. So I expect that that will probably be unveiled with the governor's budget in January.
Okay, thank you. And then mortgage taxes are down. Is that due to interest rate changes again?
Yeah, so I mean, we did about $1 million for our first semi-annual payment so far this year. So we're down a little bit from budget, but I think that, you know, as interest rates come down, we'll see a little bit more activity. That's why I've sort of moved it up to 2.2 from where we're running at 2 million.
Okay. And you've already answered my other question regarding the capital funds. It looks like they guaranteed an increase of $5 million for that, the 20 million that's budgeted.
Has the state guaranteed the increase of 5 million? No.
I'm asking because it's a 5 million. So this is money that we're anticipating requesting for the 2025, 2026.
It has been requested, and
Okay.
we are assuming that it will happen.
Okay. Those are all of my line item questions. I don't know but thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Farrell.
When is 19A up?
2031.
Okay, so we have more time. For some reason, I was thinking it was a lot more imminent.
I was looking at that table today, actually, and it's closer than you think.
Yeah, I mean, that's still very upcoming, but I was thinking it was like 26 or 27, and I'm really happy to hear that it's not.
No, 19A is.
And I didn't hear, I think Megan asked this, but I didn't hear this one, like I didn't hear correctly. The landfill income increase is just the receipts, like it's better reflects what's actually happening?
Correct.
Okay, so we're not taking in any more.
No.
Okay, good. That was the other one I wanted to double check, and then Councilmember Keegan asked on my other one, so we're good.
Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you, Chair. I only have one quick question about the ARPA funds. So we're looking to get the 11.4 million out the door in the next 3 months?
as much as we possibly can. Obviously, we've budgeted $2 million in next year's budget to sort of account for a bit of a tail, but everything's been allocated, and that's really just a cash flow entry for next year.
Okay. And my landfill question's already been asked and answered. I guess my only concern is the 6.4 million for the traffic violations. I think maybe it underestimates how good people can be when they know they're being videotaped, versus how they may act when they're not being hit by cameras and fees. I see, when I drive home, I see a huge reduction once you hit Washington Avenue and you have those flags saying 20 miles an hour. I don't think people realize how slow 20 miles an hour feels on Washington Avenue. But when I see everybody else going so slow, it makes me think that's good. That's the whole point. We want to do public safety. We want to make sure our kids are safe. But it concerns me that I'm not sure if that 6.4 million is going to be actually reached. So I guess my only question would be is, if we don't reach, what's the contingency? I mean, what's the contingency if we drop to 3 million or 2.5?
Yeah, I mean, luckily we're going to start to get some data, over November and December, which, does allow us the entire year of 2025, should these revenues be less than anticipated. So we can make fairly moderate and modest, adjustments when we know about things very, very early in the year. To your point, this revenue is not going to be zero, and we can all debate whether 6 million is right or wrong, but the variance of $1 or $2 million on a $220 million budget is manageable.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. And I'll be honest with you, I hope it's low, not because I don't want us to have the revenue come in, but more because it will mean people are keeping streets and our kids safer. So I hope it's a low number, and I hope we can make up that shortfall. With that said, I guess my next question I always ask is, how's our fund balance doing?
So we had a positive year last year. We increased fund balance by about $550,000. We're about 17.3 million.
17.3. Okay, thank you.
All right, a couple questions from me here. So just going back to the 19A funding, I know we're looking to combine the Capital City 19A into a permanent ask. Can you just explain where we are in that process? And also, given that 19A is going to end in 2031, as you stated, I believe the plan is to hopefully find another source for the pilot via Harriman campus. Could you just go into a little bit more detail there?
Yeah, well, I think that the Empire State Plaza pilot obviously was scheduled and is scheduled to end in 2031. I think that if anyone thinks that can actually happen, both from an equity side from the state and for us, I think that's probably not the case. A $15 million reduction in our state aid and would really be impossible for us to overcome. And whether that $15 million is technically for Harriman or technically for the Empire State Plaza, I don't think is of a big issue. I do think that, yes, that these two sources of funds need to be combined and made permanent, from the state, as well as grow on an annual basis. We end up in this same position that we do every 2 to 3 years, where we go back and ask the state to increase our funding by 2, 3, 4, 5 million. So, our proposal, as the mayor lined out, was to have these increases, or this funding increased by the tax cap. That, this funding is supposed to represent a pilot for the $6.5 billion in land the state owns, including Empire State Plaza, including Harriman, including everything else, and have it grow by the tax cap if that's what it's supposed to be, a payment in lieu of taxes.
And so just to further elaborate on that, so we are going to request that. And what are the next steps in that process for that permanency? Like, are we?
Well, we would, of course, be very happy if the governor would include it in her proposed budget to the legislature. That would be optimal. And if that doesn't happen, then we will then obviously lobby both our members and other members of the legislature to ensure that, you know, we get the fair share that we need. I mean, no other city in the state has the level of exempt property that we do. It's not even close. I mean, most municipalities have 25%, 30% of their property exempt. We have 65%.
And so again, just to make sure we're on the same page, so our ask is for the permanency of the 35 million initially, but an annual increase year over year.
Yes,
based on
tied
taxes.
to the tax cap.
Yeah. Okay.
Because again, if it doesn't have an inflation factor, we end up in the same spot every 3 years.
I'm sure as a body, we are very supportive of that. So any efforts you need from us, please do let us know, because we are completely on board.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll be doing some form of resolutions or what have you throughout this process. Okay, so another question for you. I'm gonna go back to the speed camera revenue. So just where are we? Because my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, is we have 3 locations now that currently have that.
Yes, I think, well, no, more than that have started the warning phase. I believe there's 2 locations that are getting turned on Monday. And then more and more and more up to the 20 will get turned on, and they will all be operational by the end of the year.
End of this year. So
Yes.
all school locations will have an operational camera by end of 2024 calendar.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And the 6.4, I know is an estimate, but is that based on the warnings that you issued at those locations?
Yes.
And the fee for that would be $50.
Correct. The city will keep $17 of the 50 and then 100% of any penalty surcharges.
Go over that one more time for me. So $50 the fee, the city keeps $17.50, and the remaining goes.
The operator.
Okay. It's a lot of tickets. Yeah. Is there any form of an increase if you have multiple violations?
No, under our statute, it is $50 flat, and no repeat offender.
Okay. Okay. I'm sure we're going to have more questions on that as we go through this process, but it does give me pause because it is so high, particularly with the first year.
Actually, generally, with these programs, the first year is the highest revenue.
Fair, because people then learn, right?
Yeah.
But also, if we get $6 million in parking revenue, right, roughly.
Yeah.
We have basically a whole department focusing on that effort, right? Well, they obviously have different things with their purview as well, but a lot of their effort and staff are related to such. So
Yeah.
our system is automatic.
The system will trigger a violation, and then the video will be sent to APD, who then will be reviewing the footage and hitting, yes, this is a real violation.
Does that then tie to the 4 new positions?
Yes, we added 5 program technicians in APD.
Okay, so is it more so, I just want to make sure that we're clear. So the additional positions in APD are also filling our new need, not just addressing the issues that we existingly have in terms of sworn officers doing non-sworn positions.
Well, I think they can do both operations. We're adding 5 new positions to assist with the additional workload administratively.
Okay. All right, I'm going to see now, and I'm sure I will have more questions in future conversations, but other council members, do we have additional questions? And committee? Yes, Councilmember Farrell.
Just on the school speed cameras, have we considered, if this is something that it does end up bringing in that revenue, just based on like the numbers of, if the fee is $50, that means that the third-party operator is getting $32.50, which is great. We appreciate them doing it, and it's a lot for us to handle taking on. So I certainly would not even consider that currently. But it is basically $11.5 million if that is going in, that would be going to the third-party operator. Has there been discussion of bringing that in-house or looking at it that you're aware of if we move forward with it?
Well, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about this over the past week, and, you know, there were sort of comments to liken this back to when the red light cameras were put in, and the city decided to do exactly as you're proposing, is the city decided to pay the vendor a flat rate per camera per month, and as you're aware, the city didn't collect any net revenues under that model previously. So I think a revenue split is probably, you know, the best way to do it. I don't think we're equipped to sort of manage the technology and the cameras as much as it does. Like, they have to go out and they have to be calibrated every day and checked, or else, you know, the tickets won't be valid. So the vendor is going to be doing that. We're required to issue quarterly reports on speed, crash data, and all sorts of various traffic components in those zones to state DOT and state DMV. So there is a lot of work going on by the vendor outside of just their software and the cameras themselves.
One more question from my part. I remembered my last one. Thank you very much to the administration on the work with the PBMs to renew or to get a new contract and bring that cost down.
Yep.
That new contract, what's the life of it? When will we be able to
3 years.
shop again? Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you, Shirley. I guess my question's really quick. So, I mean, this may be a APD question. At what point does the system click on a ticket? If you go 21, 22 miles,
Greater than 30.
greater than
30.
greater than 30. So if you stay within 22 to 25 in that area, you're good. So, well, no, I mean, because I know trying to stay under 20 is rough. Like, you go like 19, 20, 22, and you're like, oh, I gotta slow down. So, if that's what I'm a little concerned we may not get that 6.4, but I am confident you will figure this out since this is what you put on on this number. I don't know if you know the history. I'm sure you do, of the red light camera
Yes.
funding that we didn't come to bear. Again, I think it's a good public safety initiative. So, you know, if we get 1 million or 2 million or 200,000, I actually believe the lower number is the better number, because it means more people are keeping our streets safe. So, I hope you have a good plan, because I hope that number stays 400,000, even though I do think it's going to go higher. But I'm hoping people take the caution and drive safer near our schools. So,
Yes, that is the goal, and you know, as I sort of mentioned previously, you know, generally, whether it's the red light camera programs, you know, that were put in downstate, you know, the year one, you know, you see a spike in year one, and then you generally see a tail coming down. So 6 million may be like the highest number we ever get, but I think that in the first year, it's reasonable.
let's see how it goes. Thank you.
We are very interested in this, this revenue, so I'm going to ask one more question on that. The estimates that were done, the warnings that were sent, was that also based on the 30 miles per hour metric? So, and then was it built upon, your estimate was built upon that data you said?
So the reverse. So the warnings were sent out at 21. However, this estimate does not assume that 100% of the over 20 violators would then exceed 30. No. So exactly what you're saying, but sort of in reverse, rather than building up, building down.
So you potentially took like half of that into your estimate of the number of warnings that you sent?
Yes, it is a fraction of the total, yes.
Okay. Do you know the, like, the fraction?
I'll have to go pull out my spreadsheet if that's...
Thank you. Last shot here. Any other questions? Councilmember Adams.
I didn't want to say anything because it's a lot going on here. I think there's some bad decisions here in terms of voting on certain things that I don't think, I think the consequences, once things get rolling, cameras start rolling, the feedback, the issues that this is going to create is going to be maybe more than we expect. I would imagine we all realize how slow 20 miles per hour is in a city, on top of then facing red light cameras, speed cameras. Pretty much is not going to be safe to drive if you want to avoid fees, which then again goes back to the purpose of we're putting these cameras and things in places where families drive, regular people who are just trying to get to places, and we're hitting them with $50 fees that can actually build up in moments where it's going to make it very difficult for people. Understand the public safety side of it, but I definitely hope that it does not ever reach the revenue that we're expecting. I also, in this conversation, maybe in a later conversation, get a better understanding of the then process of for people who are going to come across these issues with these tickets and how they are supposed to address them, seeing how we have someone taking over for the Violations Bureau and stuff like that. I think a lot of this stuff needs to be made clear to people in the public that these devices, cameras are going to be starting when they're starting, and that the fees and tickets are going to be then rolling out very quickly. And at this moment, I do not believe the public is aware of most of this. So hopefully we do a due diligence and notifying people, educating people, especially with some of the questions we have up here, whether or not if you go over 1 mile per hour, 2 miles per hour, how is this thing catching information and reporting? These things should be, or should have, been made clear, been established for everyone to have or be aware of this information and know how this is going to work. And again, at this point, I don't think we're there because we still have basic questions on how this is about to operate, and this is going to be starting in a short amount of time. So again, I just hope that as a city, as these departments are working together to try to get this going, that we're also providing the information, education to the residents here in the city.
Councilmember Farrell and then Councilmember Romero.
I certainly don't want to derail our budget discussion, but I do want to very clearly say that we have an epidemic of speeding in our city that is causing major safety issues. I think that we are fortunate. I'm happy to even not get the revenue. I want as much revenue as we can get, but I would happily give up that revenue just for safer streets, and I do not have sympathy for people that are speeding by a school because you're risking children's lives. And I'm sorry, $50, risking a kid's life, it is what it is. Don't speed.
Councilmember Romero.
Yeah. Excuse me, just really quickly, that I'm also concerned about the notification requirement, which was, I think, twofold for the two things. One, with the lower speed limit, the mayor has already said that there's going to be, because they waited so long to next year, that there's going to be a rollout of notification through some type of city-related department or campaign that will be really publicly notifying people, obviously through signage, but also through council members in the mayor's office. And then the notification, this window that's been on the school zone cameras that's the whole point of that buffer, which is providing that notice. People that are there will be able to and are actually receiving those notifications early on. So I share your concern. I am also concerned about low-income constituents of ours that are not able to pay that, but there is a lot of notification that's going in a way that is providing that early notification so that people can know. And Councilmember Farrell is right in that when you're speeding, especially in a school zone, we're thinking about safety of children for sure. But the notification is there. And I know for most speed cameras, there's like a due process kind of requirement where there is a sign that says speed camera ahead. And I'm sure that is a concept that will be implemented in here as well. And then one last thing, just no surprise to anyone, in that I'll be in the assembly next year, and I look forward to moving forward with a permanency for this capital city funding and making these increases as the mayor suggested. So I look forward to reaching out to everyone on the finance committee and not just providing the notification to my colleague in the Senate, but to every other senator and assembly member to make sure that that has the support it needs to pass and that we're able to get the funding we need for the city of Albany. Thanks.
Thank you. City Treasurer.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple points here, just so everyone knows. Like the red light camera tickets, the speeding camera tickets do not contain points, so people don't lose their licenses over it. They are also, at this point, not SCOF eligible. What that means is that if you get too many parking tickets, and we've started to do this with red light camera tickets too, we put a DMV hold, so you can't re-register your car. That is not applicable at this point to the speeding cameras. I'm not sure if it's ever going to be applicable to speeding camera tickets, just something that people should be aware of. Also, my office we're the adjudicator of these tickets. We take a very hard line on the red light camera tickets and also on the speeding, we will on the speeding camera tickets, mostly because people can see their violation right there. They can, when they get their ticket and they can look it up online, they can see themselves actually going through the red light and actually speeding through a zone if they get a ticket. They can view it themselves. This has led to a lot of people not complaining about the red light camera tickets. I suspect the same effect will happen with the speed camera tickets. But we take a hard line, but if there are circumstances for people, we try to work with them in the Parking Violations Bureau to extend the period for payment or things like that. So just want to make sure everyone's aware of that.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to transition to our administrative services presentation. So I want to thank our city treasurer and our budget director for your time this evening, and we look forward to this budget season with you all. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I think everyone here knows me, but for anyone watching, I'm Anne Marie Salmon. I'm our Commissioner of Administrative Services. Our department, I'm looking at the first slide, provides those backbone citywide services to all of the departments and some resident-facing services, but mostly we're kind of that internal service delivery department. I put a lot of slides in here about what we do. I just wanted to remind everyone I'm not going to read them all, but you have it for your reference and you can read through it all at your leisure. I gave you kind of a functional org chart you can look at, but if you keep going on the next slide, some of the key functions we do: citywide IT, our innovation function, that general administration, everything from IT hardware support to cybersecurity to implementing new systems and technologies, softwares. We maintain the city streetlights, so I have a few just interesting functions. I have a very broad, diverse portfolio of work, but sustainability is one of the bright spots. I think the Sustainability Commission is meeting downstairs because I was going to have Jason West, our director, tell you a little bit about his program tonight, but we'll schedule another time. We also do all of the fiscal functions of the city, so obviously the city budget, our ARPA oversight, administering all of the grants for the Albany for All program. We do union negotiations, we do grant writing, trying to get as much money for the city as we can. If you go to the next slide. On the kind of workforce side, so we manage civil service, not only for all jobs within the city of Albany, but also the public libraries, the school district, and our authorities. And we also do healthcare benefits, workers' comp, sort of anything that touches sort of the people side we look at here. And then we also produce 10 plus events in our cultural affairs department. So you can read all of that later. One of the things, I haven't really talked about when I've come before you is like what that all means. So I wanted to share a few numbers. Again, I'm not going to read it, but when I say we manage civil service, I wanted to just give a shout out. I have 7 FTEs in human resources, and they manage job and exam application review for almost 7,000 jobs a year. They physically review each and every application to see if someone meets those minimum qualifications. That is just a totally manual process. We process 2,000 personnel transactions. That might be someone changes their dependent, or they change their direct deposit, or has a tax change, like any kind of transaction going through their office. We do employee retirement and benefit plans for 2,500 people. So, I think our workforce, they might have questions from time to time, what's covered, what's not, but our retirees definitely have a lot of questions, and they love calling us. We love hearing from them, especially if we know them and have worked with them in the past. So it's a lot of transactional day-to-day on that HR side, and I'm very proud of what they do with that small team, including manually bringing in applications for 825 summer youth and seasonals a year. You can read through the rest when you have a chance. Next slide, please. So some highlights, some of the projects we did this year. Join Albany continued. This is our 3rd year, and I want to thank everyone for approving that as one of our Albany for All grant awards. We've spent the whole thing, and we're going to be self-funding some continuation of these initiatives. But one of the really cool things we started this year was the monthly civil service workshop. So what that is HR goes out across the city. We've done different locations, and we teach people how to apply for a job. So we know that civil service, whether you're at the state level, the county, or the local, it's a little confusing. Like, you do need to understand what do minimum qualifications mean? What does it mean if I might have to test someday? So we host these workshops and do some hands-on help, maybe teaching people what their resume, how that might translate into a civil service job application. And then if they don't necessarily qualify, or there's no jobs in our city that meet their needs, we will refer them out, and we'll help them look at the state site, we'll help them look at the county. This has been so popular that we have the State Department of Labor, the State Department of Civil Service reaching out to partner with us on workshops. We also are partnering with the county. They've asked to be part of our workshops. HBCC reached out, and we're going to go to their campus and teach a class on government, civil service, getting a job 101. And we also have Rochester and some other counties reaching out, and cities, to do this. So I'm really proud of what that team has done. Another huge initiative you've heard about, and I want to give a shout out to Councilmember Keegan, is we're implementing paid family leave for our employees, along with some prenatal and parental leave policies. So that's going to be taking effect, some of it right now, and then some of it on 1/1. But that's a huge achievement for my team, as well as just trying to get more jobs through the help. So again, removing those barriers to entry, so we can get more people in the door to fill the vacancies, but also get a broader audience and bring people into the city who haven't typically worked for us and maybe aren't as familiar with what we do. Next slide. So budget, I'll let Gideon, he already kind of showed you what he does. But I just want to give a shout out to my payroll team. I have 3 employees that run $112 million of payroll a year. That includes various stipends and differentials depending on the collective bargaining unit you're a part of. And I have 2 employees who manage our 90 contracts under MWBE compliance, valued at over $130 million. So I just, again, we have a small team that really makes the business side of the city work. We issue over 4,500 purchase orders. You can't buy anything without one. It's part of general municipal law, finance law, but they're working hard in the background to make sure all the departments have what they need. Next slide. And then on the more budget highlights is this year we secured $13 million of grants. So a big one was obviously the NARC Swims grant. We worked with our recreation department, with our director of infrastructure management, but we've also brought in quite a few grants on some of the sustainability side and just supporting and helping write those grant applications for other departments. Next slide. So IT, I kind of talk about cyber a lot, but I really wanted to drive home that we have it currently staffed at 8 people, and they manage over 2,200 assets. Assets are, the TV here, computers, iPads, cell phones, things like that. The ratio is 158 city employees to 1 IT employee. We are trying to continue to staff up. They've brought on a couple people this year. We still have some open positions, but they are working very hard. We've responded to over 15,000 email threats year to date. We work really closely with our state and federal partners, but there's a working group regionally that's led by New York State on cybersecurity. So this is not something we do alone, but we definitely have a quite high volume for the staff we do have, and I'm very proud of what they do. Next. ARPA, we've talked about this. This will be a reference timeline for you and anyone else who looks at the presentation after the meeting, but our team has really overseen this grant program from start to finish, and everybody in this council has had participated in that process, from the leadership committee who helped select the projects to voting and giving that money over to the award winners. But right now we're at the point of we're just humming along, distributing funds. All the money's been allocated, and we're trying to really work with these partners to make sure they can spend it. Can you go to the next slide? So I won't read the numbers, but one thing I want to highlight on this slide is our team that's working on the ARPA grants. They're really flexible, trying to get these businesses and all of these local organizations to make the money work. So for example, we found out this week some of those businesses on Central Avenue that had their windows smashed. We immediately were in contact with the Central Avenue bid. We've been working with the bid, and they are able to use some of their ARPA dollars that were part of that small business grant program. They are using that to help the businesses repair windows. So it's not just kind of cutting checks when they send us that request for reimbursement, but as some of the business needs have changed a little bit, or we're a few years into grant program, we will work with them on how that looks, whether it's allowable, what we can do to sort of continue to make those ARPA dollars work for this community at the moment they need it. So I was really happy we could do that this week for the Central Ave bid. Next. Okay. Sustainability, again, a reminder, we run the streetlights. Thank you to that team. Some of the big projects from last year were all of the Broadway poles from State down to, I believe, Clinton were replaced entirely with new fixtures. They were very old and in need of replacement. We worked on the Clinton Streetscape DRI project with the lighting on the underpass. There's just been a lot more of these kind of upgrades, large scale. I am happy to say that I'd say the main part of the conversion is done. So now we're really in that maintenance mode with the streetlights, but it's kind of ongoing work. Another really exciting bright spot, you'll probably hear more about this as it continues, but we just received approval within the last 90 days. NYPA is going to work with us to build a solar farm on the capped DGS landfill. So DGS's current headquarters used to be a landfill, for those who aren't aware, and NYPA thinks it's a suitable site to put a solar farm and plug that into community solar that then our residents can kind of buy into at a future date. And we are kind of leading a cross-departmental exercise on selecting a vendor for the fleet electrification study, just helping drive those projects along that really cross all of the city departments. Next slide. Cultural affairs. I know I see you at the events. Everyone here attends them. One of the great things they did this year was work with our innovation team to do a little deep dive into the metrics. We have a couple of companies we're working with that help us track attendance. And we, I think, can fully confirm now we had over 103 attendees at the 2-day Tulip Festival back in May, and we're looking to get these metrics on our Alive at 5 series and use that to sort of continuously improve, what are the most popular times of day? Are there bands? Are there things that people like? How should this evolve as people want different things out of their entertainment? So they are putting on those events, but also kind of looking towards what do we want to directionally head on those events. Next. Okay, the numbers. You heard a lot of great stuff. So top line, we are requesting to add 2 authorized positions. So one is just a transfer over from the neighborhood services unit, the communications coordinator. That role, someone left and we had a new employee, but it had always been working with admin, but kind of getting back to doing things like the employee newsletter. We're trying to do some more engagement events, connecting our departments in with communication. And we are going to be adding a director of labor relations to really help with some of that employee communication, positive relationships within the departments. On the general fund budget, it's fairly flat. The big drop you'll see, so these numbers are changing a lot, but we had the ARPA dollars, the federal dollars from last year were accounted for within our budget. So with that kind of winding down, you have all that money coming out of our budget, $9 million removed. So that's both on the expenditure and then on the revenue side. As Gideon mentioned, the federal aid was booked last year, so that's coming off. We can go through any specific lines if you have questions when you look at our line item, but I'd say it's mostly steady, a couple little increases if we're adding a software or some subscription services, but nothing major changing in the expense lines besides the ARPA moving off. On the capital side for our department, we are currently in an RFP process for a new enterprise resource planning system. So this is the main financial system we use across the city in all departments. It tracks our budget, it's where the purchase orders are generated, it runs the payroll, we have the personnel, all those records in that system. It has inventory tracking, Darius uses it for the accounts payable. So it's time, we're in a 10-year contract and it's expiring for that software. So next year, a big project for our department is going to be implementing a new software and, a 10-year contract. So costs are going up. We do have to borrow to do the year one and a couple of the out-year costs. I think next slide, please. And on the streetlight slide, this budget's going down both in the operating side and in the capital. And I think it's going down primarily because we're moving out of the conversion and into a maintenance mode. So we don't have the same large expenses like doing all of the lights on Broadway or all the lights on State Street. Now we're looking at more, if something goes out, what do we replace it? They do have a replacement schedule if the team drives around or the vendors who we work with, we see a need, or we sometimes work with council members here if there's corners that need improvement. We add that to our list, but there's not the same level of large-scale projects. So this is seeing a decrease. We also were able to reduce costs by, it hasn't been canceled yet, but DGS is building some storage space for us for housing all of the extra fixtures and light poles. So we had been paying rent on a warehouse, and we are no longer going to be paying rent once the DGS storage space is built. We anticipate that's going to happen probably by November. We're working with them on that. And next slide, please. New initiatives. So beyond continuing our general transactional work, we have that very large ERP project. Getting that software up and running is going to be a huge one for us next year. We also had been working on a contract management system. We put it in place last year, working with Corp Counsel's office. We're adding additional functionalities, so one being the Board of Contract and Supply, which our city clerk oversees, but having all of the requests to go out to Board of Contract and Supply automated through a system, not through emails, just for better tracking purposes and transparency. We are putting in an HR case management system and sort of more like digital personnel files, kind of trying to convert some of this into more of easily searchable systems. Continue our rollout of EV chargers, IT security technology. You'll see some outreach from us on the climate action plan. We have an RFP with the DEC now for approval because we want a grant from them, but then we'll be engaging with our council members on that community-based process for the climate action planning, expanding employee engagement. These are just the highlights, so I'm happy to take questions on really anything you want to hear about. We do a lot. We would love to have you in to meet with any of our teams if you're ever curious to learn more about any of the different business areas we oversee. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from committee members? Councilmember Keegan.
I'm going to be quicker than I was with Gideon, okay? I promise. And I appreciate, again, you working late this evening and taking time to answer questions about the budget. You said that one of the things that you guys did this year was implement a contract management system. Does that include managing our or function also as a grants management system? And what I mean by that is it looking at our compliance, or does it track our compliance with state, federal, or foundation funds that are coming into the city?
So not yet. I guess there's two pieces to this. One, we started with the procurement contracts, and I think some of this was to make sure, again, on those kind of internal controls the budget office oversees, that we have the final executed copy at our fingertips to make sure we're getting the right item prices or the right rates that we agreed upon with our contractors, having that be easily searchable. So we started putting everything procurement in there, but we also been putting in all of our maybe labor agreements, MOUs. We configured a piece of it for our community ACDA department so they could put their grant contracts in there. I do have copies of, let's say, all of our federal and state agreements, but in general, the grant tracking I have to use for the state Grants Gateway, and for the feds I have to use grants.gov, or they have several different sites depending on the federal funding source. So we do have our contracts in our system, but a lot of the minutia of adding reports we put within those systems at the state or federal level, but there's nothing prohibiting us from necessarily putting some copies of those reports in our system, and it's something that maybe we can look at for next year.
I just think it's healthy for us to have that easily searchable, findable. God forbid we ever get audited, even if we've put all the information in. It would be nice that we sort of have that buffer, because we never want to be in a position where those entities are clawing back money, because it would destroy our budget going forward. And you had also mentioned that you were in the process of implementing an HR case management system. Does that mean that you're going to be digitizing pretty much everyone's HR records?
So I don't know what that's going to look like exactly yet. I mean, we'll have to RFP it out. It'll probably be a new piece of software. I would say we're operating on a hybrid model now, right? Like some things might get scanned in depending on the type of record, or how it's managed, right? Like our benefits records are already digital within our ERP system. But I think, we still have, if you go into the HR office, lines of P files, and maybe we wouldn't necessarily bring in all of the retired employees today, but looking to start transitioning existing employees into kind of like a secure, permission-based digital system, so you can reference these things without having to check 8 different cabinets. But we are going to put this out to bid and sort of see what comes back and take some presentations. I'm going to call around to some other employers and see, how people handle this in different public sector, even private sector industries. Like, what does that look like? I know a lot of organizations have moved more digital on this, and it's time for us.
Okay. And I know thus far the installation for EV charging has predominantly been taken on by the parking authority, and I was hoping you might be able to speak a little bit more specifically about how the city plans to get into the mix on building out that infrastructure.
So we've already installed 8 dual EV charging stations, and we have 14 dual EV charging stations that are going to be installed, if weather permits, I assume, first or second quarter of next year. We had been waiting almost a full year to get grant contracts on the 500,000 we won previously for those 14, and that's been managed by our sustainability department. But one of the things that's been very interesting, and I think the climate action plan is going to help, is we started by putting the chargers on city property, right? There's one outside City Hall, a lot of our parks. We're putting one into Hoffman, so people who come visit that rec center have it. We have it at Henry Johnson Boulevard. Like, we're putting it at some of our sites, but there's been discussion, you know, we were going to put one in Washington Park. I think we still have it on the plan, but there was a lot of community members who didn't love that idea, and it really was great to have those conversations, because we realized people have a lot of just interest and excitement about looking at how this streetscape might be changing in years to come. So I think part of that climate action plan process will be to talk specifically about EV chargers, like if they do take up, they will take up a parking space for a gas-powered vehicle. How are we going to work on that together, right? How do we work with our business community? How do we work with our residents? So I think we've been doing it as we get grants at city properties, and we still need them at city properties. People visit, especially if there's a parking lot, you know, it's great to be able to plug in. But I think we're going to try to really ramp up and even ramp up our grant funding requests and put in more funding when we have a real robust plan. But I think now is the moment we really need that community engagement on where these things are going to go. We do partner with the parking authority, so we have put in quite a few, and we have 14 more coming, and they help us do maintenance on it. So we have a relationship with them where they're maintaining it, but we are doing our own as well.
Just in terms of feedback and thought process, I know we're starting with city property, but we, despite the sort of idea that people may be concerned about loss of parking in certain neighborhoods, we also have a lot of neighborhoods in the city where people do not have the ability to charge from their home. Like, they're never going to be able to run a charging line from their window to their car across a sidewalk, depending on the density of the neighborhood. And so I think part of what we need to think about is how do we make charging capacity available in those areas of the city, because otherwise people are not going to be able to switch or make that transition over. I think those are all the questions I have with regards to the projects that you had in here this evening. Thank you so much.
Additional questions? A couple questions from me. So in regards to the remaining ARPA funds, this is all related to the Albany for All funding. Can you go over that timeline for when all that money needs to be expended by?
Yes, so the money had to be allocated by 12/31 of this year, so it's allocated in our budget, but we were also working directly with the 35 project recipients to make sure they had true funding plans so that it's allocated on their end. Well, the last thing we wanted was that we allocated it in the budget and then they can't spend it. So that process is complete, and we are very comfortable with everybody having the ability to spend it. They need to expend all funds by, well, the U.S. Treasury says we need to expend all funds by 12/31/26. So we gave them a deadline of a couple months before that, so if there's a problem, we can troubleshoot. So we've asked them to try to expend everything by 9/30/26, but U.S. Treasury is 12/31.
Mm-hmm. So you just said it in there, but given that we have more than half of that left to expend, you're confident that we'll be able to expend with the time frame we have?
I think some of the slower projects are some of the big capital ones. So for example, Trinity Alliance had one of the largest awards, and they are trying to acquire property adjacent to theirs. I think, Habitat had a huge award, and they are slowly putting out houses every year. And I think the biggest spends will make it there. And then some of the programmatic ones that we're providing with service delivery are now kind of, first year was sort of building the program, let's say Jewish Family Services. Year 2 getting underway, and I think they're kind of working out the bumps on any of the service delivery programs. And I think we do meet with everybody at least a few times a year, and confident that some of the service delivery is speeding up, and then the capital projects are on track.
Thank you. Next question I have here is you had mentioned receiving a NIPA grant to pursue a solar, or, right?
So it's
So solar farm?
actually not, as far as I understand, and I can bring Jason in at some point to talk more, it's not a grant. They're going to build it. So, you know, we'll be signing an agreement with them, and they're going to do the whole site preparation and kind of run it for us, which they're the experts, the New York Power Authority. And then they just need to find developable sites, and then they're kind of leading that initiative for us.
Excellent. My question was stemming from the NIPA grant line being 0, so that's helpful that it's not a grant process and they're going to run the show.
We'd like that too.
Excellent. Okay. Let me just make sure. The climate action plan, can you go over that general timeline? You said you have an RFP right now.
So we had an RFP ready, but because we were successful, which is a good thing, in winning a $100,000 DEC grant to fund this, they had to take it, and they're looking at it on their side. There's certain requirements, and they need to review it. So we anticipate we'll be able to release that, I think, this month. If not, it will be early November. And then I would like to kind of move that quickly and find a vendor who could start working with us 1/1/25, and part of that would be, you know, we'll do some project planning, but then probably even have a kickoff meeting with our council, with some of the stakeholders in this room, to talk about what the engagement should look like, you know, with engaging our residents. So part of this climate action plan will be they'll help us look at city operations, right? They'll be kind of back end of the house. What should we be looking at, you know, 5, 10, 20 years out on our city operations? Like, what are those benchmarks? So it's similar to the Albany 2030 plan, but for climate. And then there's the external side, like the community reduction of the greenhouse gases. What are those initiatives? How are we going to bring people in? So we want to get started. I'd like to get started on planning for the community engagement right away, so that we can have a really great maybe spring and summer season next year when people are out more, really getting in there and talking to people.
Last question for me, just for special event revenues. In 2024, for Alive at 5, we more than doubled the anticipated, the adopted as part of the budget process compared to 2023, landing at 150. How did have the actuals came in for that?
Yeah, we have done better this year. I'll have to go look up the exact number, but you know, we're trending upward, and I think some changes we're going to be making next year, you know, I think we'll get more people out there and make that number achievable, which is a number that, you know, prior to COVID was something, you know, 150,000 was a level that we achieved, you know, nearly every year.
Understood. Okay. Thank you. Questions from council members? Councilmember Keegan?
I have one thing that I forgot to ask you, and it's about the union contracts. We settled 2 contracts. Do you know how many contracts we have outstanding or are anticipated to come up?
So the only contracts currently outstanding are the 2 Council 82 contracts. That's for both sets of police civilian employees.
Was it the sergeants that hadn't settled in forever and ever and ever? Have they never settled?
No, the police superior officers have been settled. So both the PBA and the superior officers are now settled.
Okay. So it's just Council 82 that's...
They have 2 units. They have the civilian employees, both the non-sworn in the office, as well as the E91 dispatchers.
Did the non-sworn staff that we brought on, the social workers, are they part of the non-sworn?
No, those positions are not represented at this point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Romero?
Thanks. My question is about the newly created labor relations position, and is that also in coordination with the database that you're talking about, and some of the, or your intention to kind of involve yourself in software database? And the reason I asked that question is the workforce committee that was created by the council and some of the complaints with workforce that we've seen. I'm just curious if that is the intention with those positions and that software/database.
I mean, I think that they'll be working together. So the way I'm thinking about it, there's a couple different needs sort of in that workforce area, right? There's the HR transactional, that's your benefits, I talked about your civil service, a lot of that like personnel administration. But I think there was a bit of a gap on this employee relations side, and I think, you know, I'm hearing about that now, and it was important to put that in this budget. So that to me is like building and maintaining the positive relationships that sometimes is different from the transactional work, and it's often different skill sets, or, you know, you need additional personnel to do that. So I think, you know, handling conflicts, helping with that communication, helping with the departments on how they manage their workforce, leading trainings, things like that. So I think it's, you know, HR still does some of that, but shoring up that function, and I would expect both roles to really support in building that software. And also my kind of innovation team who just does software implementation. So it'll probably be a nice working group putting that together.
So just to be super clear, because I don't know if we will not have an opportunity to talk to you like this again, the database you're saying is to kind of is potentially to correct this gap that we see from the chief city auditor's report that says that there's no report or digitization of the HR complaints that are
Yeah, I
coming
think
in.
one thing that happens, you know, people leave, people come, people go. We do have all of our files, but they often are stored in different cabinet, or sometimes someone had it saved one way. So I think having very consistent practices for saving and being able to retrieve quickly and catch any patterns and like look at that in a database is really important to sort of getting to that next level. And it's something we've been wanting to do, and definitely kind of looking at that audit is a gap and something I want to take care of in our department.
Great, that's wonderful. And you think that'll come in January is the plan?
Well, so I think we'll RFP it, and then we'll start a project. Sometimes a software implementation, I'd say the contracts, for example, that's a different software, but similar in some ways, right? It's housing records. It probably took us 4 or 5 months to get the first phase done, where we have like a decent library of our base records. Again, this is a much larger project looking at the personnel records. So we'll figure out, you know, you might pick a certain type of record to do first. So I think it's going to be kind of a phased approach, and it could take a year, but it'll just kind of go by urgent need and look at different, what do we want to put in first? How do we want to get those? What gets scanned? Do I use a third party to help me scan? It'll be more to build out this project.
Will the RFP and the software also contemplate like ease in making reports or complaints with HR?
For sure, yeah. I think, I mean, there's, in my mind, no point in having a software that you can't easily report out of. That's one of the main goals, is to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Okay. With that, we are at the end of our first meeting for this budget cycle. I want to thank everyone who joined us, including our Commissioner of Administrative Services, Anne-Marie Salmon, our Budget Director, Gideon Grande, and our City Treasurer, Darius Shanafar, as well as others. Thank you to the council members that joined us as well, in addition to the committee, and we will be back here on Tuesday to cover both fire and police. And then next week, additionally, back here on Thursday to cover Rec, Youth Force, and CPRB. Okay. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn? Motion from Councilmember Keegan, second. Second from Councilmember Adams. All those in favor? Aye. All right.